All right. This week we are talking about chapter 29 and the reading that you should be doing there. I feel like that this chapter covers a large swath of European history. I mean, we've done that throughout 101 and 102 thus far, and it's hard. That's exactly why we do. I do these videos to tell you exactly what it is that I'm looking for, and hopefully that you're able to glean from the readings that you guys do. So this is a tough one because I feel like that there's so much that we could do, but really I need to understand as an instructor that we can't go into detail on all of these things. There's just no way that that's going to happen. And so what we're going to do is touch on a few of the things and where we want to go from here. We've talked a lot about colonization. What we get from this is decolonization, and we'll get there in a minute. But I feel like that we're going to end at a place where a lot of you are going to start to recognize history. And at least if you don't, I do. These are a lot of things that the end of this chapter that I was alive for. And so it seems like that some of you will probably be able to do that. Some of you maybe not. But you should at least recognize what's going on as we move this direction through the chapter this week. Ultimately, what this means is chapter 29 this week, chapter 30 next week, and a final, and you guys are done. Most of you have done well, and I'm really excited about the possibility of you guys going on and trying to put more analysis and significance to current events. And we'll do one last video with the final as a study guide, and I'll talk more about that when we get there. Probably another longer video that will help you to understand what we're going through and what we're doing. And how I hope that this class has helped you. So let's get into the reading this week, though. The first half of the 20th century, to me, is fascinating. It is really one of two halves of the century that is amazing. First, you get the colonization and the immense wealth that is really taking part across the globe due to colonization. Okay, out of wealth, we see that there is influence around the world in manufacturing, banking, and consumer demand, right? I mean, that's really what we're seeing. And that's why these European countries decide that it's best if they colonize. They have cheap labor, cheap land. They really can take control by going in and doing that. Another thing that we see in the beginning is military power and military might, which helps European nations, at least the superpowers of the time, to go in and control most of Africa and a lot of Asia. And so they colonize, and with that colonization brings stability. Okay, we talked a while ago about colonization and whether you thought it was good or bad. And I think that a lot of you made great points on either side, and really, in my mind, I think one of the things that you need to take away from it is that colonization brings stability in a lot of different ways. If I was asking you about a question about colonization on the final and decolonization, I would definitely want you to talk about stability, and either the stability with colonization or the instability with decolonization. And I think that you're going to see that this week in this week's reading. The second half of the 20th century brings about a completely different landscape. We have two world wars that go on, which devastate Europe. We're talking millions and millions of men who are killed, quite a few women and children. One of the readings that I have in my U.S. history is Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut, where we get to read about some of the things that go on, including the bombing of Dresden. Dresden is an amazing city where it is like highbrow society, a lot of art, a lot of architecture. Even today, it's a beautiful city. It is bombed and left in ruins. And, cities like that in Europe don't ever quite come back from that. One of the things that I read, that I have read, is Simon Schama's Landscape and Memory. And that book is amazing to think that as you cross over some of these lands, some of our lands, but a lot in Europe, is the multiple battles that have taken place, and the forest continues to grow over the top of it. And we can go back and look and see those see these things, except the landscape hasn't really changed, but it's affected the people. And that's really what I want you to get out of this turning point after World War II. You have the Yalta Conference, you have things that happen that we decide that we're going to move forward with. But ultimately, here's what I want to get at: political collapse. We have political collapse throughout Europe, which causes a vacuum, and two nations stand up and become superpowers: the United States and the Soviet Union. The rest of those countries are really trying to take care of themselves and trying to rebuild, trying to recoup losses. Honestly, you should look at it at how devastating war is, and what exactly it did to these countries in destabilizing those countries and those powers. How powerful they were before, they're still powerful countries. What I think that they come out of is with a wisdom that is really unparalleled in society today. I think at this point it would take something different. It's to put it into an American perspective, it's the United States pre 9/11, post 9/11. We're a different country, and we have laws and regulations and things like that due to that. And this is what happens after World War II. Okay, the U.S. and Soviet Union become superpowers. They both have nuclear weapons. This creates the Cold War. You have both powers, one that is trying to push communism on those countries that are now being decolonized. You have a lot of countries that are becoming independent, being free from Europe and French control throughout Africa and Asia. Until 1991, every skirmish in the region becomes a rivalry battle. Okay, a rivalry between the Soviet Union and the U.S. and the Soviet Union is looking for more communist countries. The United States is looking to hold that off, and they want democratic countries. And I mean, even the smallest skirmishes become huge problems that we see in the Middle East that we'll get to in just a minute. Really, though, the second half with decolonization, and you see these countries gaining their independence, creates this vacuum where the United States and the Soviet Union go in and they try to impact politics, economies. They try to do these things. Two big ones. The U.S. gets into Vietnam, which they probably shouldn't have due to what happens in the end. The Soviet Union gets involved in Afghanistan, also something that they probably shouldn't have done. In the end, you have the U.S. backing different countries that are going to war against the Soviet Union. Soviet Union is doing the same thing against the United States. Every small skirmish becomes a rivalry. Okay, and that's really what I want to bring out with that point. These nations continue to fight, continue to do these things, but at some point, 1991, you get Mikhail Gorbachev, who says that they cannot continue. They can't continue keeping up with the Cold War, and they need to think about themselves. Part of this is from a lot of the things that are going on at the time and fighting multiple wars, trying to back other countries who are going to war with the United States. Part of it is a relationship that Mikhail Gorbachev has with the U.S. President Ronald Reagan at the time. And so you get this back and forth, and they fall into poverty trying to take care of their own people and kind of back away from the global stage at that point. However, there is a reading this week, if you read the extra stuff in the green, that talks about Vladimir Putin's idea for the future, which I think is fascinating if you get a chance to read it. Those things are not necessarily required, but if you get a chance, it gives you his idea for the future, which we now see is what Russians wanted. They want a strong leader. This leads me to my last point: decolonization. Decolonization in the region creates some huge problems as larger countries try to come in and not colonize. Okay, the U.S. is not trying to colonize. However, we have military bases all over the world. We're not trying to colonize. What we're trying to do is have some sort of political clout in the region, and that's something that we need to continue to be aware of. The Soviet Union tries to do this. Multiple countries continue to try to do these things and take up that void so that they can lead a country in the direction that they want to go. And decolonization creates instability in those regions, major ones. We get terrorism that starts to come up with the Islamic State, with Boko Haram. I mean, all of these things that are going on today is a factor from decolonization. As we decolonize, you have somebody who needs to come in and lead these people. And I think in hindsight, Saddam Hussein potentially should have stayed in power, but we don't know that at the time, and it takes history to say, well, shoot, he was keeping these crazy terrorist factions down and being able to make sure that they were that the country was running, although he did horrible things as well. And so what do? It's a catch-22, I think. And so that's where we're at. It ends really with this idea of decolonization. I hope that you see that in the reading this week. This is a lot to cover. If it is too much at the end of the semester, read the points that I've just talked about. Decolonization, the Cold War, the political collapse after World War II. Those are major points that I want you to be able to understand and to be able to relate as we go into the final in a couple of weeks. I hope that you've had a great week. I look forward to the end of the semester with you and look forward to your responses on these tests. So far, everything has been great. I know that we slumped a little bit in the Unit 3 test exam, but I know that you guys will make a great push for the final. We'll see you next week.